In the bleak midwinter, frosty wind made moan. Earth stood hard as iron, water like a stone. Snow had fallen, snow on snow, snow on snow. In the bleak midwinter, long ago.
There it stood, a sign above the counting-house door. Scrooge and Marley. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name after his death. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge by his name, sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Scrooge was hard and sharp as flint, self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his features, stiffened his gait, and permeated his voice. His coldness permeated everything about him and followed him everywhere he went. Scrooge's office was frigid in the winter. He didn't warm it a single degree at Christmas. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, no wintry weather chill him. The heaviest rain, snow, hail, and sleet could boast only one advantage over him. They often came down handsomely, and Scrooge never did. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come join me for dinner?" No beggars dared ask him to bestow a trifle. Children did not ask him, "Please, sir, do you know what time it is?" Even blind men's dogs seemed to know better than to approach him, and when they saw Scrooge coming, they would tug their owners out of the way. Once upon a time, on Christmas Eve of all days, Scrooge was hard at work in his counting-house. It was a cold, bleak, and unusually dim winter's day. The clocks had only just struck 3, but it was already quite dark outside. Candles were flickering merrily in the windows of neighboring offices. The door of Scrooge's office was open to ensure that he could keep an eye on his clerk, Bob Cratchit, who sat at a dismal little desk, working diligently. Scrooge had a meager fire for himself, but the clerk's fire was so small that it looked like a single lit coal. But the clerk could not replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box by his side. When Cratchit glanced at the small fire with a glint of hope in his eye, Scrooge scowled at the clerk. The clerk shivered, pulled close his comforter, and tried to warm himself at the candle. Suddenly the door of the counting-house flew open.
"A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!"
Bah, humbug.
"Christmas a humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I am sure."
I do. Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough.
Come then. What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough.
Bah, humbug.
Don't be cross, Uncle.
What else can I be when I live in such a world of fools? Merry Christmas. Out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older, but not an hour richer? If I could work my will, every idiot who goes on about a Merry Christmas would be roasted with his own goose and buried with a stake of holly through his heart.
Uncle!
Nephew, keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it mine.
Keep it? But you don't keep it.
Let me keep to my custom, then. Much good may it do you. Much good has ever done you.
There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say. Christmas among the rest. But I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time, when it has come around, as a good time. A kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar year where men and women seem willing to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of other people, people below them in means, but equal to them in dignity, as equals in their right to dignity and joy and celebration of life. And therefore, uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe it has done me good, and will continue to do me good. And so I say, God bless it.
God bless us, each and every one.
One more sound from you, and you'll be celebrating Christmas at the soup kitchen. You're quite the eloquent speaker. It's a wonder why you don't go into politics or the clergy.
Please, don't be angry, uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow.
I suggest you share your Christmas sermon with all the other sentimental folk that wind up in Bedlam, where they belong.
But why?
Why did you get married?
Because I fell in love.
Because you fell in love. Good afternoon.
Uncle, you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now?
Good afternoon.
I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends?
Good afternoon.
I am sorry, with all my heart, to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel that I am aware of, but I have come to you in honor of the holiday, and I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So, a Merry Christmas, Uncle, and a Happy New Year. And to you as well, Mr. Cratchit.
Thank you kindly, sir.
Upon making his exit, Scrooge's nephew had let 2 other people in. They were alms collectors, pleasant to behold. They stood in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands, and bowed their heads as they stood before him.
Scrooge and Marley's, I believe. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?
Mr. Marley has been dead 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night.
We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner.
At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually desirable that we set aside provisions for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir.
Are there no prisons?
There are plenty of prisons.
Excellent. I was afraid from what you said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course. I'm very glad to hear it.
They scarcely bring Christian cheer of mind or body to the destitute, Mr. Scrooge. In light of that, a few of us are endeavoring to procure the poor some food and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time to collect because it is a time, more so than any other time, when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices.
What shall I put you down for?
Nothing.
You wish to be anonymous?
I wish to be left alone. Since you ask me what I wish, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I pay my share of taxes to support prisons, the workhouses, and the like. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there.
Many can't go there, and many would rather die.
If they would rather die, they had better do it, and decrease the surplus population. If your business is concluded, I suggest you make your exit. Good afternoon.
I can't understand how someone could be so heartless at Christmas.
God rest ye merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay.
Silence! Silence, I say!
At length the hour of shutting up the counting-house had arrived.
You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose.
If quite convenient, sir.
It's not convenient, and it's not fair. Why should I lose a day's wages, while you receive a day's wages without a day's work?
If you would be so kind, Mr. Scrooge. After all, it's only once a year, and my wife and children cherish it so.
A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning.
I will, sir. I promise you. And a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you and yours.
Bah! Humbug!
Scrooge, having no reason to stay at the counting-house, went to his quiet quarters. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. His home was dreary and dismal enough, for no one lived in it but Scrooge. Now it is a fact that there was nothing at all exceptional about the knocker on the door of Scrooge's home, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. Let it also be said that Scrooge had not spared one thought on Jacob Marley since he had mentioned his partner's death earlier that very afternoon. And then let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having left his key in the lock of the door, looked at the knocker and saw not a knocker, but Jacob Marley's face. Startled, Scrooge sought to take a closer look, but as soon as he recovered from his shock, the knocker appeared to be a simple knocker once more. To say that he was not startled, or that his heart was not beating hard, would be untrue. But Scrooge put his hand upon the doorknob regardless, turned it sturdily, walked in, lit his candle, and closed the door with a bang. Scrooge was not the sort of man to be frightened by echoes, but the sight of Jacob Marley's face was burned into his mind's eye and made him uneasy. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs more cautiously than usual. Before he shut the door to his bedroom, Scrooge glanced about the hallway to ensure that everything appeared as it always had. He had just enough recollection of the face to feel the need to survey the room. Satisfied that it was all in its usual state, he closed the bedroom door and locked himself, double-locked himself, in fact, which was not his custom. Confident that he was safe and sound, he took off his cravat, dressed for bed, and sat down before the fire. It was a very low fire indeed, a trifle on such a bitter night. Still it was warm and warded off the darkness and cold.
Humbug!
As the humbug left his mouth, Scrooge became aware of the soft ringing of a bell. It was with great astonishment, and with a strange, inexplicable dread, that he stood up and looked to find the source of the sound. He heard the bell begin to ring louder and louder, and slowly but surely more and more bells joined the otherworldly choir. Soon the room was flooded with the sounds of loud, cacophonous bells. Suddenly the bells ceased as they had begun together. They were succeeded by a clanking noise, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over a stone floor. Scrooge then remembered once hearing that ghosts, that haunted houses were often described as dragging chains.
It's humbug still. I won't believe it.
His skin grew pale, though, when, without a pause, it came through the bedroom door and entered into the room before his eyes. The dying flame in the fireplace leapt up as if it were to exclaim, "I know him! That is Marley's ghost!" and died, leaving the room dark, except for the faint, eerie light emanating from the spectre. The chain it drew was clasped about its middle. It was long and wound about him. It was made of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him, could see the smoldering wood in the fireplace.
Who are you?
Ask me who I was.
Who were you then? You're particular for a
In
shade.
life, I was Jacob.
Can you sit down?
I can.
Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost might find itself able to sit in a chair. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it.
You don't believe in me.
I don't.
What reason do you have to doubt your sense?
I don't know.
Why do you doubt your senses?
Because a little thing affects them. Perhaps I'm having a bad dream. Perhaps you are the product of a bad meal. You may be the product of an undigested bit of beef, a crumb of bad cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are.
Scrooge was not in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel, in his heart, by any means comical at that moment. The truth is that he tried to be smart, as a means of distracting himself and keeping his terror at bay, for the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow of his bones. At this mockery, the spirit raised a frightful cry and shook its chain with such a dismal and appalling noise that Scrooge held on tight to his chair to save himself from falling to the ground in fear.
Mercy, I beg thee, dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me?
Man of worldly mind, do you believe in me or not?
I do. I must. But why do spirits walk the earth? And why do they come to me?
It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk among his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth, and turn to happiness.
You are wrapped in chains. Will you tell me why?
I wear the chain. I forged it. I girded it on my own free will. And of my own free will, I wore it. Do you know the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? Yours was full and as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. Yours is a tremendous.
Scrooge glanced about him on the floor, expecting to find himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing.
Old Jacob Marley, I don't understand. Have you anything comforting to tell me?
I have no comfort to give, Ebenezer Scrooge. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never left our counting house. Mark me. In life, my spirit never roved beyond and weary journeys lie before me. Till the end of eternity.
You must have been very slow about it, Jacob.
Slow?
7 years dead, and traveling all the time.
The whole time. No rest. No peace. Incessant torture of remorse.
You travel fast?
On the wings of the
You might have
wind.
got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years.
The ghost, on hearing this, set up another cry and clanked its chain hideously in the dead silence of the night.
Bound and double iron.
not to know that ages incessantly by immortal creatures for this earth must pass into eternity before the good of which it is susceptible is all developed. Not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast needs and usefulness. Not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one life's opportunity misused. Yet such was I. Oh, such was I.
But you were always a good man of business, Jacob.
Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my...
The ghost held up its chain at arm's length, as if that were the cause of all of its unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground.
At this time of the rolling year, I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down, and never raise them to that blessed star which led the wise men to our poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light would have conducted me?
Scrooge was deeply disturbed by the ghost's words and began to tremble.
Hear me, my time is nearly gone.
I will. Don't be vague, Jacob. Please.
How is it that I appear before you in a shape that you can see? I may not know. I have sat beside you many and...
It was not an agreeable idea. Scrooge shivered and wiped the cold perspiration from his brow.
That is no light part of my penance. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance of escaping my fate. A chance and hope of my forgiveness.
You were always a good friend to me. Thank you.
You will be haunted by three spirits.
Scrooge could feel his heart beating rapidly in his chest.
Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob?
It is.
I think I'd rather not.
You cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first when the clock strikes midnight. The second when the church bells has ended. And the last when the last is lost. For your own sake, remember what has
Couldn't I take them all at once and have it over with, Jacob?
The apparition walked backwards, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the spectre reached it, it was wide open. It beckoned Scrooge to approach, which he did. When they were within 2 paces of each other, Marley's ghost held up its hand, warning him to come no nearer. Scrooge stopped. Scrooge became aware of confused noises in the air, heart-rending sounds of lamentation and regret, wailings inexpressibly sorrowful and accusatory. The spectre, after listening for a moment, joined in the mournful dirge and floated out into the bleak, dark night. Scrooge approached the window, desperate in his curiosity. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste, and moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. Some few were linked together, but none were free. The source of their misery was clear. They sought to interfere for good in human matters, and had lost the power forever. Whether these spectres faded into the evening mist, or the evening's mist enshrouded them, Scrooge could not tell. But the spectres and their voices faded, and the night became as still and silent as it had been when he had walked home. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double-locked, and the bolts were undisturbed. He tried to say humbug, but found himself speechless. And being, from the emotion he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the conversation with the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose. went straight to bed, and fell asleep upon the instant.
It came upon the midnight clear, that glorious song of old, from angels bending near the earth to touch their harps of gold. Peace on the earth, goodwill to men, from heaven's all gracious King. The world in solemn stillness lay, to hear the angels sing.
When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark he could hardly see to the end of his bed in the gloom. Scrooge scrambled out of bed and groped his way to the window. He rubbed the frost off the window with the sleeve of his dressing gown before he could see anything. And even then, he could only see a little. All he could make out was that it was still very foggy and extremely cold. It was quiet and still. Scrooge went back to bed again and thought, and thought, and thought it over and over and over, and could make nothing of it. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was, and the more he endeavored not to think, the more he thought. Marley's ghost bothered him a great deal. Every time he was almost able to, convince himself that it was all a dream, Jacob Marley's face flashed before his eyes.
Was it a dream or not?
Scrooge laid in bed, pondering. Scrooge remembered with a start that Marley had warned him that he would receive his first ghostly visitor when the bell struck midnight. He resolved to lie awake until the hour was past. Suddenly, and without warning, a glorious light filled up the room. Scrooge found himself face to face with an unearthly visitor. It was a strange figure, like a child, and yet not a child. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a single wrinkle. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and around its waist was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. The light that had seemed to summon the visitor appeared to emanate from the ghost itself. Just like a candle, whose light flickers and seems to constantly move, so too did the ghosts.
Are you the spirit whose coming was foretold to me?
I am.
Who and what are you?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Long past?
No, your past, Scrooge.
Is it possible for you to dim your light? After all, it is past midnight.
Would you so soon put out the light I give, when so many of your fellow man wish so ardently for it to shine upon themselves?
Why have you come?
For your welfare, Scrooge.
Thank you, spirit. Though I cannot help but feel that a full night's rest would be better for
Take heed. Rise and walk with me.
It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not to his liking. The spirit's grasp, though gentle, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, began to falter.
I am a mortal. I'll fall to my death.
Bear but a touch of my hand, and you shall be safe.
As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon a country road, with fields surrounding them. The city had vanished entirely. Not a vestige of it was to be seen. The darkness and the mist had vanished, and it was a clear, cold winter's day, with snow upon the ground.
Good heaven! I was bred in this place. I was a boy here.
Scrooge, flooded with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares long, long forgotten.
Your lip is trembling, and what is that upon your cheek?
Nothing, Spirit.
Do you remember the way?
I could walk it blindfolded.
Let us go on then.
They walked along the road until a little market town appeared in the distance, with a bridge, a church, and a winding river. A group of young boys appeared before them. They shouted gleefully to one another and played in the snow.
These are but shadows of the things that have been. They have no consciousness of us.
I remember all of them. Their names, their favorite games, everything.
Scrooge marveled. Why did his cold eye glisten and his heart leap up as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas as they parted and headed for home? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas! What good had it ever done to him?
The school is not quite deserted. A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is still there.
I know.
They walked and soon approached a mansion of dull red brick. Entering a dreary hall, the ghost and Scrooge walked to a door at the back of the house. It opened before them and showed them a melancholy room filled with desks. At one of these desks, a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire. The spirit touched him on the arm and pointed to his younger self, intent upon his reading.
Poor boy. I wish. But it's too late now.
What is the matter?
There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should like to have given him something, that's all.
As the words left his mouth, Scrooge's younger self grew older, and the room became darker and disheveled. The windows cracked. Fragments of plaster fell from the ceiling, and the room carried an air of hopelessness. Scrooge looked at the ghost, and with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously towards the door. It opened, and a young lady came darting in and threw her arms about him.
Brother, I have come to bring you home.
Home?
Yes, Father is so much kinder than he used to be that home is like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one night that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home. And he said yes, and sent me in a coach to bring you. We're all to be together for Christmas and have the merriest time in all the world.
A delicate and dear thing, but she had a large heart.
So she had.
She died a young woman, having borne one child, your nephew, Scrooge.
Fred.
In the blink of an eye, Scrooge and the ghost stood before the door of a warehouse in the midst of a busy city street.
I was apprenticed here.
They walked through the door.
Why, it's old Fezziwig. Bless his heart. It's Fezziwig, alive again.
A small matter to make these silly folks so full of gratitude.
Small? The man threw the most lavish parties you'd ever seen. With enough food to feed an army, enough drink to drown a navy. He hired musicians, and he gave his apprentices the week off.
He has spent a pittance of his total wealth to provide such merriment. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?
It isn't that, Spirit. He had the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune.
What is the matter?
I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now.
My time grows short. Quick!
Again, Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of his life. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl. There were tears in her eyes, which sparkled in the light that shone out of the ghost of Christmas past.
This is the way of the world. There's nothing more grueling and painful as poverty, and there's nothing more valuable than the pursuit of wealth.
You fear poverty more than you love people.
Why does that matter? I love you. Isn't that enough?
The fair girl shook her head.
Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be poor. I worked to provide us a means to rise above our station. We should improve our worldly fortune by our patient industry.
You have changed. When I fell in love with you, you were another man.
I was a boy. A foolish boy at that.
We were happy then. And that is all I ever wanted. I can no longer bear the sight of the man you have become.
What changed, Belle?
Your nature, your spirit, Ebenezer. I would gladly think otherwise if I could. You may. The memory of the man you were makes me hope you will have pain in this. You will suffer briefly and then dismiss the memory of it gladly, as it were an unprofitable dream. May you be happy in the life you have chosen, Ebenezer.
She left him, and Scrooge and the ghost looked on as the fair young woman began to walk away.
Spirit, show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me?
One memory more.
A room, not very large or handsome, but full of comfort, appeared about Scrooge and the ghost. Near to the fireplace sat a beautiful woman, sitting opposite her daughter. The mother and daughter laughed heartily as a gaggle of cheerful young children ran about the room. But now a knocking at the door was heard, and such a rush immediately ensued, just in time to greet the father, who came home attended by a man laden with Christmas toys and presents. Scrooge looked on more attentively than ever. When the master of the house, having his daughter leaning fondly on him, sat down with her, and her mother at his own fireside, Scrooge considered the pride and joy he might have known in having such a daughter, and bowed his head in regret.
My dear, I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon.
Who was it?
Guess.
Not Ebenezer Scrooge.
His partner, Jacob Marley, is near death, I hear, and he sat alone in his counting house, quite alone in the world, I do believe.
Spirit, remove me from this place.
I told you these were shadows of the things that have been, that they are what they are. Do not blame me.
Remove me. I cannot bear it.
Like a candle on the verge of burning out, the spirit's light flickered and began to grow dim.
Leave me! Take me back! Haunt me no longer!
Unaware that he had returned to his bedroom chamber before he had finished his plea, Scrooge found himself standing in the dark. He returned to his bed and fell into a deep sleep.
Little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie above thy deep and dreamless sleep. The silent stars go by, yet in thy dark streets shineth the everlasting light. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight.
Scrooge tore himself from his sheets and sat upright in his bed, gasping for breath and drenched with cold sweat. His eyes darted about in the darkness, desperately searching for the flickering light of the ghost of Christmas past. Content that the room was as dark and undisturbed as it had been before Marley's arrival, Scrooge gave a sigh of relief.
Thank the stars. It was nothing more than a bad dream. Still, it all seems so real.
Scrooge wiped the perspiration from his brow and glanced at the window. It was still night. In fact, the church bell had yet to cease its chiming. Content that he was safe, Scrooge yawned and settled himself back into his bed.
Perhaps I should consider a career in writing for the theater. The things my mind can conjure. Expect the first when the clock strikes midnight, the second when the church bell's song has ended, and the last when faith is lost. What a load of hogwash!
Scrooge smiled like a contented child. He closed his eyes and savored the sound of the church's bell. On most nights, that sound would have filled him with irritation. Tonight, it was as sweet as a symphony. Silence. The sweet, comfortable silence of Christmas Eve. Scrooge inhaled deeply through his nose. He could have sworn he was in the midst of a great feast taking place in the woods, for he smelled the most delightful melange of roast meats, freshly baked bread, and the sweet fragrance of holly. Scrooge opened his eyes and was astonished at the sight. It was his own room, there was no doubt about that, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The fireplace was lit, and the fire was roaring with the pride of a lion. The walls and ceiling were covered with lush, verdant greenery. Crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light from the fireplace like smiling mirrors. Heaped up on the floor like a cornucopia were perfectly roasted turkeys, stacks of richly glazed ham steaks, and a gaggle of gorgeously prepared geese. Long links of sausages were strung about the room like celebratory banners. Steaming chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, and rosy pomegranates hung from the greenery like lanterns. Sumptuous and towering cakes tickled the ceiling. Lounging comfortably by the fire sat a jolly fellow, glorious to see, who bore a wide smile.
"Come, Scrooge. Come and know me better, my dear man."
Scrooge rose timidly from his bed and hung his head like a boy being scolded by his teacher. He was not the proud and arrogant Scrooge from earlier that day, and though the spirit's eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet them.
"I am the ghost of Christmas Present. Look upon me."
Scrooge did so. This spirit was clothed in a simple green robe that was trimmed with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its chest was bare. Its feet were also bare, and on its head it wore a crown of roses. The ghost's hair was a rich mahogany brown, and so long that it fell about its broad chest. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but there was no sword in it, and the sheath appeared to be eaten up with rust. Its genial face, sparkling eye, cheery voice, and joyful air brought a smile to Scrooge's face, in spite of his fear. Scrooge's cheer was soon replaced with apprehension, when he saw that amongst the beautiful petals of the crown of roses were sharp thorns.
"You have never seen the likes of me before, have you?"
Never.
The ghost of Christmas Present rose from Scrooge's chair.
Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night with the ghost of Christmas past and learnt a lesson. If you have something to teach me, let me profit by it.
"Good man. Touch my robe."
Scrooge did as he was told. The pleasant scene of fire, food, and foliage vanished instantly. The pair stood in the city streets on Christmas morning, where the people made a rough but not unpleasant kind of music with their actions. Some folks scraped snow from the pavement in front of their dwellings. Children played and dogs barked merrily. Neighbors basked in the warmth of each other's company and merriment and laughed. Though the sky was gloomy and the streets choked up with a dingy mist, it was as though a ceasefire had been declared against woe. There was nothing cheerful in the climate, yet there was an air of cheerfulness that even the balmiest spring day would have envied to inspire. Soon the steeples began their song, calling all good Christians to church and chapel, and away they went, flocking through the streets in their best clothes and with their gayest faces. At the same time, emerging from what seemed like the void, innumerable, disheveled, and underdressed people came shuffling towards the steeples. Though their garments were shabby and their faces thin with want, their eyes shone with hope. The sight of these poor revelers appeared to interest the Spirit very much. As they passed, the Spirit showered them with a glittering light that coalesced into a halo above their heads.
What is it that you are throwing on them, Spirit?
It is the light of gratitude, Scrooge. For even under the weight of their earthly woes and with eyes blinded by mortality, these people's hearts are open to the light of gratitude, and thus they are blessed.
Scrooge cast his gaze to his feet, wondering if, perhaps to an onlooker, he might have such a light to brighten his countenance. In time, the bells ceased, and the town was quiet once more. In the stillness, Scrooge lifted his face and looked at the ghost of Christmas Present.
Would you share your light with anyone, rich or poor or indifferent?
It is not mine to give or withhold. It is for all people to receive. That said, I do find that it is the poor that most often find themselves open to receiving it.
Surely the rich are in need of such light.
Yes, and the rich are often in greater need of such a light. And yet it is often the poor that are most willing to share that light. Therefore, it is of greater prudence to me to ensure that the light is given to those who will do the most good with it.
Spirit, I do not understand. Wouldn't your light be best shared by those with the means to share it? After all, how can a poor man share anything when he has nothing to his name?
Are you saying that though you have no light to share, you are better equipped to share my gifts than I?
Scrooge found himself at a loss for words and hung his head.
There are others upon this earth who lay claim to speak on my behalf, and who do deeds of passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in my name. These folk are strange to me and my kin. Should you choose to share your gifts or keep them to yourself, the choice is yours to be made of your own free will. Charity can only happen freely and with humility. Otherwise, it is not charity. Remember that.
Scrooge promised that he would, and they went on, invisible, into the suburbs of the town. Perhaps it was the ghost's kind and generous nature that led them to the Cratchit home. Perhaps it was Scrooge's envy of the grateful that brought him to the Cratchit home. Maybe it was the light that emanated from the Cratchit home that led Scrooge, and the ghost of Christmas Present was simply accompanying Scrooge on his journey. Perhaps the light shining from the Cratchit house was the same light that guides all people of faith to good deeds. In any case, once they arrived at the Cratchit's home, the house shined even brighter. It shone with such beauty and magnificence that it brought a tear to Scrooge's eye. Bob Cratchit earned a pittance of a salary. Scrooge knew that well. And yet, Bob Cratchit possessed a gift greater than any of the riches that Scrooge had ever known.
Oh dear, I pray Martha will be back soon.
Mother, I'm home.
Bless your heart, how late you are.
Well, I had to finish up the work from last night and clean up the shop this morning, Mother.
As long as you are home and safe, I count my blessings with a glad heart, my sweet girl. Sit down before the fire and warm yourself. You'll catch your death in this cold. Your father should be home any minute. I will fetch the little ones.
It was as if her words had magicked her husband home. Bob Cratchit walked in through the door, his cheeks ruddy from the cold.
Martha, my sweet girl, you're home.
Mr. and Mrs. Hopkins said that since my work is finished, I could take Christmas Day. Here, Father, I brought this from the shop for you.
Martha handed her father a patchwork scarf, tenderly stitched together. It glowed with the gentle radiance of the morning sun.
I made it for you. I know how cold Mr. Scrooge's office is.
My sweet girl, thank you. But I insist, I want you to keep it for yourself, for the walk home from the shop.
Father.
Scrooge, do you not see the bitter fruits of your selfishness? That poor girl was willing to brave the frost, to spare her father suffering in the cold that you permit to chill your counting house. Surely you can afford to spare the coal to save these two from the cold.
Coal is expensive.
Yes, it is. And suffering is free. I suppose that is why you find yourself so generous and willing to share your own.
Scrooge's face flushed with embarrassment. He was unaccustomed to such naked criticism. Lost for words, he turned his attention back onto the Cratchit family.
Come, dry your eyes. Where's your mother?
Right here. I'm right here with Peter and Tiny Tim.
Merry Christmas, Father.
Peter hugged his father tightly, while Tiny Tim reached towards him from his mother's arms.
Merry Christmas, my boy. And how did little Tim behave?
As good as gold, Bob. Somehow he gets so thoughtful, sitting by himself so much, and says the strangest things you ever heard. He told me, when I brought him down for supper last night, that he hoped the people saw him in church, because he was a cripple, and that it might be pleasant for them to be reminded upon Christmas Day that the Lamb of God helped the lame to walk and the blind to see.
Bob Cratchit took Tiny Tim from Mrs. Cratchit's hands and hugged him close so that his wife might collect her faculties. Tiny Tim's little wooden crutch stood by the fireplace, where it glimmered like a scepter decked in jewels. Before another word was spoken, Bob Cratchit carried Tiny Tim to their table, followed by Martha, young Peter, and his kindly wife. Such joy filled the room that if you didn't know better, you might have thought that Christmas dinner was a once-in-a-lifetime celebration. Mrs. Cratchit roasted the goose, whipped up the gravy, made the stuffing, and served the meal with the graciousness of a queen. Peter had mashed the potatoes with incredible vigor, and Martha sweetened up the applesauce and offered to help her mother to set the table, to which Peter exclaimed that he wished to help too. Bob sat Tiny Tim upon his knee at the head of the table, while the two other Cratchit children set the table. At last, the dishes were brought to the table and grace was given. It was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, with a theatrical pause, smiled at her family and prepared to butcher the bird. The air was alive with excitement, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the smiles on his family's faces, thumped his little hands on the table.
Mommy, I'm hungry.
There was never a sweeter meal. At last, the dinner was done. The table cleared. The family fed.
God bless us. Each and every one.
God bless us, each
God
and
bless
every
us,
one.
Each and every one.
I didn't know that Bob had more than two. Spirit, Tiny Tim will surely grow to be in good health, won't he?
If things remain unchanged, I foresee a vacant seat and a crutch, carefully preserved, without an owner.
Spirit, I beg you, say he will be spared.
If he is to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Those were your words, were they not, Scrooge?
Scrooge bit his lips ruefully to hear his own callous words quoted by the Spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief.
Scrooge, look on.
The ghost of Christmas Present pointed to the Cratchit family.
God bless Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast.
I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it.
My dear, the children, it's Christmas Day.
How can you wish well upon such an odious, stingy, cold, unfeeling man as Ebenezer Scrooge? You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do.
I wish for his wellness, with the same gladness in my heart that I wish for all of you.
I will not waste my well wishes on a petty and stingy tyrant. A long life to him would be a waste. Better he be snuffed out like a candle, quickly and painlessly. That is the best I can wish for Ebenezer Scrooge this Christmas.
She thinks such ill of me?
Have you given her reason to think better of you?
The mention of Scrooge's name cast a dark shadow on the festivities. It was the first moment that the family was aware of the bitter coldness of the winter. It was the sole moment of despair in their celebration. After it had passed away, they were 10 times merrier than before, from the mere relief of Scrooge the petty tyrant being done with. It was a great surprise to Scrooge to hear an unfamiliar laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge when he realized it was his own nephew's laugh. Scrooge and the ghost of Christmas Present were standing in a gleaming room beside his nephew and his wife. The ghost of Christmas Present stood by Scrooge's side, smiling fondly at the sight. While there is an unpleasant truth that disease and sorrow are contagious, it is a greater joy to know that there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humor.
He said that Christmas was a humbug, and as a matter of fact, I think he believed it, too.
Shame on him.
He's a strange old fellow, that's the truth, and not as pleasant as he could be. Nevertheless, I have nothing to say against him.
I'm sure he is very rich, Fred. At least you always tell me so.
His wealth is of no use to him. He doesn't even make himself comfortable with it. He hasn't the satisfaction of thinking that he is ever going to benefit us with it. I am sorry for him. I truly am. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who suffered the most from his behavior? Himself. He won't come and dine with us on Christmas. What's the consequence for us? It's him that has lost out on a free hot meal with his family after all.
I think he loses a very good dinner.
I'm very glad to hear it. The price of his attitude and not making merry with us is, I think, is that he loses pleasant moments, which could do him no harm. I am sure he has lost more companions through his manner than he has lost to age and illness combined. I give him the same opportunity every year, whether he likes it or not, because I pity him. He may rail at Christmas till he finds himself on his deathbed, but I can't help hoping that if I keep saying, "Uncle Scrooge, won't you join us and make merry this Christmas?" perhaps he may take me up on my word. If nothing else, it puts him in the mood to leave his poor clerk a Christmas bonus. That's something worth doing, isn't it?
The ghost nodded its head in agreement and looked upon Scrooge with a raised eyebrow.
Do you wish to leave?
No. They seem to be playing a game. I think I'd like to watch them make merry just a while longer.
The happy couple was playing a game called Yes or No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and his wife had to figure out what he was thinking of, to which Fred would only answer yes or no, depending on what was asked of him. His wife elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal, a live animal, a rather disagreeable animal, an animal that growled and grunted sometimes, and talked sometimes, and walked about the streets. It was not a horse, or an ass, or a cow, or a dog, or a pig, or a cat. At every question that was asked, Scrooge's nephew would burst into a fresh roar of laughter, and was so inexpressibly tickled that he was obliged to get up off the sofa and stamp. At last, his wife found out the answer.
I know what it is, Fred. I know what it is.
What is it?
It's your Uncle Scrooge.
He has given us plenty of merriment, and it would be ungrateful not to drink to his health. Here is a glass of cider. To Uncle Scrooge. He wouldn't take it from me, but may he have it nevertheless.
Hark, my time is drawing near.
Scrooge's eyes were cast to the ground when he realized that he was the source of Fred and his wife's laughter. Scrooge found himself rather uncharacteristically sheepish. He noticed a strange sight at the feet of the ghost of Christmas Present.
What is that protruding from your skirts, spirit?
Look, and do not shield your eyes.
From the foldings of its robe, the ghost brought forth 2 children, wretched, hideous, and miserable. They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment. They were a boy and a girl, meager, ragged, and scowling, but prostrate too in their humility. Where graceful youth should have made their features round and gentle, theirs were pinched, harsh, and wicked. No invention of humanity could eclipse these monsters in their horror. Scrooge started back, appalled. Having them shown to him in this way, he tried to say they were fine children, but the words snuffed themselves out rather than be accomplices to such a lie.
Are they yours?
They are man's, and yet they cling to me. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both. Beware this boy, for in his mouth, his hands, and his heart, doom has made its wretched home. Waste not a breath in nurturing it. Slander those who tell it to ye, deny it. Beware this girl, for her appetite is as boundless as the heavens and unquenchable as the fire that swallows up the land. Waste not your fortune in feeding her. Scorn those that seek to stoke her flames. Rebuke it.
Have they no refuge or resource?
Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?
Scrooge fell to his knees in shame and supplication, and the town's church bell rang with a plaintive song.
Expect the first when
as the last stroke ceased to vibrate,
the second when the
Scrooge remembered the words of old Jacob Marley.
And the last when faith is lost.
Lifting up his eyes, Scrooge saw that the ghost of Christmas Present had vanished. The town had grown dim, colder, and more cruel. Off in the distance, Scrooge could see the chilling sight of a draped and hooded phantom, slowly approaching him like an angel of death.
To Bethlehem, come and behold him, born the King of angels. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord.
The phantom slowly approached Scrooge in the eerie silence. It was shrouded in a deep black robe which concealed its head, its face, its whole form. Nothing about the figure was visible except for a single outstretched hand. When it came near him, Scrooge prostrated himself before the spirit in supplication. The phantom's ethereal presence filled him with a solemn dread. When the spirit reached Scrooge, it neither spoke nor moved.
I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come.
The phantom answered not, but pointed onward with its hand.
You are about to show me shadows of the things that not yet happened, but will happen. Is that so, spirit?
The phantom gave a single nod of its head. That was the only answer Scrooge received. Although well used to otherworldly company by this point, Scrooge feared the silent phantom far more than any of the spirits that preceded its arrival. The phantom paused a moment, as though it sensed his fear, and gave him time to recover his bearing. But Scrooge was all the worse for this. It thrilled him with a vague, uncertain horror to know that behind the shroud that was blacker than a starless sky were ghostly eyes intently fixed upon him, while Scrooge could see nothing but a spectral hand emerging from a black void of unknown horror.
Ghost of the Christmas yet to come, I fear you more than any specter I have seen thus far. I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to be a better man than what I was, I am prepared to bear you company, and do so with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?
The phantom gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them.
Lead on. Your time is waning fast, and it is precious, I know. Lead on, spirit.
The phantom moved away as it had come towards him. Scrooge followed in the shadow of its robe. They walked down the main road, unseen by the few souls that dared brave the dark and cold. As they strolled, Scrooge overheard a hushed conversation.
I don't know much about it either way. I only know that he's dead.
When did he die?
Last night, I believe.
Why, what was the matter with him? I thought he'd never die.
God knows.
What has he done with his money?
I haven't heard. Left it to his company, perhaps? He hasn't left it to me, that's all I know.
Should we make up a party and volunteer to attend?
I don't mind going if lunch is provided.
Scrooge shuddered. From the cold or from the coldness of their words, I cannot say. The phantom glided onwards. Scrooge followed down the quiet street and went into an obscure part of the town where Scrooge had never dared to tread. Though he was unfamiliar with the street names and the dingy shops, he recognized its situation and its bad repute. The whole quarter reeked with crime, filth, and misery. In the midst of this den of ill repute stood a singularly unkind-looking second-hand shop. Outside the storefront were two people, clutching large bags with hungry looks in their eyes.
Every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did.
That's true indeed.
Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose.
Maybe if he'd had been decent to somebody, he'd have someone to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying gasping out his last there, alone by himself.
Nothing truer has ever been said.
Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror. He viewed them with disgust, as though they had been grave robbing in front of his eyes.
This is the end of it, you see. He frightened everyone away from him when he was alive, to profit us when he was dead.
Spirit, I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this?
He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now they stood in a dimly lit bedroom. On the bed, beneath a ragged sheet, lay something that was covered up. In the corner of the room stood Tiny Tim's little wooden crutch, glimmering faintly in the dark. Scrooge glanced towards the phantom. Its steady hand was pointed to the mound on the bed. Though the room was dim, and Scrooge could feel the beating of his heart in his chest, the small mound eclipsed all with its deafening tomb-like silence. They stood for a few moments in silence. When Scrooge could no longer stand it, he broke through the silence.
Spirit, this is a fearful place. In leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson. Trust me. I beg you, let us go.
Unmoved, the phantom pointed with an unmoved finger to the mound on the bed.
I do not understand you. What have I to do with this?
The phantom slowly moved its accusatory finger towards the bedroom door. As though summoned, the door opened and behind it stood the Cratchit family, dressed in mourning garb, with tearful faces.
Mother, are we ruined?
No, my sweet girl. There is hope yet.
To whom will our debt be transferred?
I don't know. Your father is at their office.
Spirit, please, let me see some tenderness connected with a death.
The phantom stood still and silent as ever. Slowly, the phantom pointed its finger back to the mound on the bed.
The dark hurts my eyes. My poor Timothy, my sweet baby. Where is my boy?
In horror, Scrooge's face turned white and he clutched the phantom's robe. Martha and Peter embraced their sobbing mother and did their best to contain their grief.
Spirit, something tells me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me, why do you show me a vision of Timothy Cratchit on his deathbed?
The phantom said nothing and continued to point its finger at the corpse of tiny Timothy Cratchit. Without moving, the scene around them dissolved into nothingness. In its place appeared a cemetery. The phantom stood among the graves, and where its unmoved finger pointed stood a gravestone. Scrooge advanced towards it with terror.
Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they the shadows of things that may be only?
Still, the phantom said nothing, nor moved. Scrooge crept towards the grave, following the finger, and read his own name from the neglected headstone.
Spirit, hear me! I am not the man I was.
Scrooge threw himself prostrate before the spirit.
Why show me this, if I am past all hope?
For the first time, the kindly hand of the phantom appeared to tremble.
Good Spirit, your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. Spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach.
Hark the heralding angels sing, glory to the newborn King. Peace on earth and mercy mild, God and sinner reconciled. Joyful all ye nations rise, join the triumph of the skies, with the angelic host proclaim, Christ is born in Bethlehem. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King.
Scrooge awoke in his bedroom on Christmas morning. The light of the new day shone with heavenly brilliance. Scrooge's face was drenched with tears, which he wiped away with his sleeve.
Jacob! Jacob, if you can hear me, God praise you. I am a changed man, a better man. I am here, and the shadows of the things that would have been may be dispelled. They will be. I know they will. I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything. Never mind, I don't care. I don't know what to do first. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as blessed as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy, and I'm as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody. A Happy New Year to all the world.
Scrooge, not caring that he was in his sleeping clothes, ran straight out of the front door of his home onto the streets of the town, and laughed. Really, for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh. A most illustrious laugh. The father of a long, long line of brilliant laughs.
What day is it, my good lad?
It's Christmas Day, Mr. Scrooge.
It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. Of course they did. Hello, my fine fellow.
Hello.
Do you know the poulterers on the next street? On the corner?
I should hope so. Their birds are the best in town.
An intelligent boy. A remarkable boy. Go and buy it for me, and I'll pay you generously for your efforts.
You're pulling my legs, sir.
I am entirely earnest. Go and buy it and bring it here, that I may tell you where it belongs. The sooner you get back, the bigger the piece you shall have to eat.
The boy was off like a shot. In the meantime, Scrooge caught sight of the knocker that he had seen Jacob Marley's face in.
I shall love it as long as I live.
Scrooge pat the knocker with his hand. Panting, the young boy was back with the prized bird.
My word, you're a fast young lad. The turkey's already here. It's impossible to carry that to Camden Town. Here is money for a ride. See that the bird is delivered to the Cratchit household at supper time, and I shall guarantee you a seat at the table and enough leftovers to last you into the next week.
Scrooge went back into his home and dressed himself in his finest clothes. Once he was sure that he was dressed to the best of his ability, he stepped out onto the street. By this time, people were pouring forth from their homes, just like he had seen when he stood with the ghost of Christmas Present. And walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded every person he saw with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant that 3 or 4 good-humored people responded, saying, "Good morning, Ebenezer. A Merry Christmas to you." He had not gone far when, coming on towards him, he beheld the 2 alms collectors from the day before. It sent a pang across his heart to think how these 2 would look upon him when they met, but he knew what path lay straight before him, and he took it.
Please excuse me. I hope you succeeded yesterday in your efforts. It was very kind of you. A Merry Christmas to the both of you.
Mr. Scrooge?
Yes, that's my name, and I fear it may not be pleasant to you. Allow me to ask your pardon. And will you have the goodness to...
Lord bless me! Mr. Scrooge, are you feeling well?
Better than I could ever wish. I insist, and not a bit less. Many back payments are included in it, I assure you.
My dear sir, I don't know what to say to such charity.
Don't say anything, please. Charity can only happen freely and with humility. Otherwise, it's not charity, after all.
Scrooge passed by the church and admired the steeples and the bells. He walked about the streets and watched the people hurrying to and fro. He patted children on the head and spoke with beggars and looked into the windows of houses and found that everything gave him great joy. He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything could give him so much happiness. In the afternoon, he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. He passed the door 12 times before he had the courage to go up and knock.
Is your husband home, my dear?
Yes, sir.
Where is he, my love?
He's in the dining room, sir. Might I ask, who are you?
I am Fred's uncle, Ebenezer Scrooge.
Fred's wife could hardly conceal her astonishment to find herself face to face with the infamous Uncle Scrooge. Even more shocking was that she found him to be such a kind and gentle man.
Fred, my dear man, where are you?
Why, bless my soul! Who's that?
It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to visit.
Scrooge was at home in 5 minutes. After giving both his nephew and niece a hug, he begged their pardon.
Forgive my brevity, but I must finish a small bit of business before I continue the festivities.
But Uncle Scrooge, it's Christmas. What business could you possibly have to conduct on Christmas Day?
Mankind is my business. The common welfare is my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence are all my business, my dear nephew.
As Scrooge approached his counting house, he could see Bob Cratchit and his wife standing at the door. Scrooge had to stifle a chuckle as he thought of the surprise that they had in store.
What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?
I am very sorry, sir. I know I am late. You see, my
Step
wife...
this way, sir, if you please.
Once a year, Scrooge. Is my family not entitled to decent treatment from you for a single day of the long year?
No, don't!
Cratchit, I am not going to stand this sort of thing any longer, and therefore... I am about to raise your salary.
The Cratchits dared not open their mouths to reply, for they were sure that they were dreaming to hear such words from Ebenezer Scrooge's mouth.
A Merry Christmas to you and yours, Bob. A merrier Christmas, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas feast, should your wife permit it. Let's make up the fires, and be sure to set aside a tidy sum for your daughter to get herself a new scarf before you dot a single I, Bob. The weather isn't getting any warmer until spring, and your girl should be warm on her way home. We've got a lot of changes to make to Scrooge, Marley, and Cratchits.
Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good an employer, and as good a man as the city could ever know. He was a better man than any other good old city, town, or borough, or the good old world had ever known. Some people laughed to see the change in him, and others were skeptical. Scrooge let them laugh, talk, and question. He did not mind them, for he was now wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for the benefit of others at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in. Knowing that there were far greater maladies in the world with nothing to cure them, he was quite content to laugh. His own heart laughed and was joyous, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, but thought of them every day afterwards for the rest of his life. After that day, it was always said of him that Ebenezer Scrooge knew how to keep Christmas. May that truly be said of you and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim Cratchit reminds us, we say unto you,
God bless us, each and every one.
Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room. And heaven and nature sing. Heaven and nature sing. And heaven and nature sing.